Hey everybody, it's Nathan Selove with a very special video today. It's election season, which means that political candidates are laying out their various platforms on how to help certain groups of people, and the media is breaking them apart and critiquing them and discussing them in debates. Except, of course, for one community, and if you watch this channel regularly, you probably know which community that is. It's the disabled community. Now, that doesn't mean that various political candidates don't have platforms on disability rights, but they aren't really being talked about much in the media or in debates or in anywhere really beyond just disability rights circles. Now, I don't talk about politics that often on this channel, and part of that is because there's a lot of toxicity that comes from talking about politics on YouTube. But maybe that's part of the problem. You see, there's a culture of sympathy on both sides of the political aisle when it comes to talking about people with disabilities. Nobody wants to be considered the anti-disability candidate, so it's often not talked about on either side. And while this has saved the disabled community from the type of scrutiny that is often levied against other marginalized communities, it's resulted in very little structural change, and it's kind of left us behind. Now, there is no question that the Americans with Disabilities Act is the Civil Rights Act of the disabled community. And yet, it didn't come under the same scrutiny that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had. And the reason for that was because it was kind of designed that way. It didn't have a lot of controversial things in the legislation. Now, that isn't to say that the Americans with Disabilities Act is not an important piece of legislation and an essential piece of legislation, or to say that the activism that got us it was not deeply important or even provocative. In fact, there were disability protesters who were in wheelchairs that went to the stairs of the Capitol, forced themselves out of their wheelchairs, and tried to climb up the steps of it to demonstrate the importance of ramp access. And while that didn't get a lot of national attention, it made it very difficult for people to oppose the Americans with Disabilities Act. But at the same time, the effort to make it as non-controversial as possible kind of gave it some important limitations. For example, a lot of access violations within the Americans with Disabilities Act are not enforced through direct oversight. They're enforced through complaints. For example, when I had an access violation in which a restaurant straight up threw me out because of my service dog, I contacted the Justice Department, submitted a complaint, and the issue didn't end up getting settled until a year later. Now, justice was received in the end, but that's the type of delay that people with disabilities can expect from the current law. The Americans with Disabilities Act should be enforced through direct oversight, like how we do with health inspections. Now, I've talked about this issue before, but ask yourself this. How many politicians have you ever seen talk about these issues in a direct public context? How many media commentators are asking questions? Have you even seen one debate question about the limitations of the Americans with Disabilities Act? The culture of sympathy occasionally throws us a little bit of a bone. Some politician or some actor or some commentator makes some mean comment about people with disabilities. And they're rightly called out for it. They're canceled, they're kicked off the air, or maybe they're just forgotten. And we move on to the next issue. But meanwhile, the structural barriers that are keeping people with disabilities down are not addressed. People feel satisfied that they were the ones that called out the mean comments. But it doesn't change what we go through. It doesn't change the fact that according to the Rudderman Family Foundation, a third to a half of instances of police brutality occur against people with disabilities. It doesn't change the fact that according to the National Council on Disability, people with disabilities are twice as likely to live in poverty. We make up 12% of the working-age population, but 50% of those living in poverty. 32% of people with disabilities are employed, compared to 73% of non-disableds. People with disabilities are 20% less likely to graduate from high school. These are serious barriers that need serious solutions, and they're not being addressed. They're not being talked about. I don't give a damn what party you're from. I don't give a damn about bipartisanship. We need actual solutions. And if you're running, if a politician is running and they don't have a platform on disability, they should drop out. The point of this video is not to endorse a specific candidate or even a specific set of policies. I might do that in a later video, but that's not what this is about. This is about making sure that you are taking disability into account when you vote. Whether you're voting in a primary or voting in the general, look at the disability records and the disability proposals of candidates running for office on every level of government. If they don't have one, then that's a problem. If you're going to town halls and you're talking to the candidates, bring up disability. Force them to talk about it. Make sure that they know they can't get away with leaving the disabled community behind. I know that there are many within the disabled community that are nervous about losing that culture of sympathy because that might put us under the same scrutiny that other marginalized groups are under. And that is a legitimate fear. But we need changes. We need to be part of the national conversation. We do not need to accept the status quo. We should not accept the status quo. So don't be afraid to step on some toes, to piss some people off, to get passionate, to get angry. Because that's how change gets made. Not about quietly accepting the way things are, but for fighting for the way they should be. If you're someone that considers yourself an ally to the disabled community, then that's great. If you're someone that gets outraged when someone says something ableist in a public setting, that's great. If you want to call them out, that's great. But you have to take the next step. If you truly want to be an ally for the disabled community, you need to take the next step. Stay informed on pieces of disability legislation, either in your state, local, or federal government. Call representatives, call elected officials, contact them, scrutinize them, show up to their town halls, and remind them not to forget about the disabled community. That is fighting for real structural change. That is how we win. That is how we build a better world. I usually keep political discussion on this channel to specifically focus on disability rights. However, if you are interested in politics, I have a podcast in which I do political discussion and political breakdown every week with my friend Michael. It's called The Perspectrum. If you're interested in it, it is on Spotify, it is on the Apple Podcast app, and it's on Podbean. I will leave links to it in the description, so check it out if you're interested. In the meantime, that's today's episode. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a like, a share, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Check out some of my other stuff, and if you want to support the channel in other ways, support me on Patreon, and you will see me in the next one.